record this session for the people who couldn't make it today. And so I just want to let you know that we are recording this session. I'm also going to put a link in the chat to a document, a shared document that we can all work on, we can all get to. And lots of the information that I'm going to go over today is also in that document. So I don't think you'll need the slides. I think the document has everything plus more. So I encourage you to get in there and look around, and we will come back to it in a little bit. So I guess I wanted to start out by talking about what the session objectives are. So pretty straightforward. By the end of this session, I hope that you'll be able to explain the basic core principles of self-determination theory and how it's relevant to higher education. You'll be able to identify strategies that support the three key human needs, competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And hopefully you will have thought about, or at least planned out, or imagined a way that you could incorporate self-determination theory into your courses somehow. And we'll go over some of those possibilities as we go forward. I was going to do a poll, as you can see here, but there aren't that many of us, so I can just ask you, instead of making you do the poll, you can do the poll if you want. But what are the biggest challenges for student engagement in your classes? Is it, you have trouble getting them participating in discussions or completing readings, or maybe just having enthusiasm for the subject matter? Which of these three things or others do you have trouble with? You can either put it in the chat or unmute, whatever you want. What is it that you struggle with in terms of your student engagement?
Hey, this is Meg. I'll just say that I tend to have, what I've noticed in my classes, are one or two students who dominate discussion. And then on the flip side of that, like always a couple students that never, ever, ever speak at all. So it's like
Yes.
balancing those two extremes.
That's a very common experience that I've had many times in my classes. You get those talkers, and full disclosure, I was one of those talkers when I was a student, so it's hard for me to feel mad about them. But and in some ways they're really helpful, because you ask a question, someone's going to answer, right? You got those two talkers, so the problem is that the rest of the class doesn't answer. And what happens usually is that the first time you ask a question, no one says anything, and then eventually one of those two talkers says something, and that sets the tone for the rest of the semester. It seems like all of the other students know that they don't need to answer. Like they're just totally off the hook. When you ask a question, they're not even considering answering, because they know that those two other students are going to answer, and so they don't have to do it. So it's a hard thing to get past. Just as an aside, one of the effective strategies, I think, for doing that is think, pair, share. It's a very simple, but there's a lot of beauty built into the think, pair, share thing. And one of the key aspects of it is the very first thing, where you give students time to think on their own. Because some people don't think as fast as others. Those two talkers, they're quick, right? They know what to say quick, but other students, it takes them a while to think. And so if you give them a minute to think, even just 1 minute, but you got to time it out, because a minute seems like forever. If you time it out for a minute, and then you say, okay, now turn to the person next to you. Now everybody has something to say. They've thought of something to say, right? Instead of not just checking out, they are thought, and they have to turn and talk to somebody. That's a little scary for some students, but it's good for them. But they've got to say something. And even if they don't have something good to say, the other person's going to say something. And maybe they don't say, neither one of them has something good to say. Okay. But now they're talking. And then if you can get them to share around, you get to hear from lots more people in the classroom. And then that sort of diffusion, or really it's a consolidation of responsibility. All the responsibility for answering are consolidated into those two people. What you want to do is spread it out, so everyone feels like, oh, I have to say something. So think, pair, share is quick, easy, no prep time. It might take 5 minutes, 4 minutes. But it's a really effective way of getting the entire class to think about the question and think about what their answer is. So that's one of the things I think that can help. All the above, yes. Yeah, there are big problems. Yeah, GSD 101, you guys, you teach, those who teach that class are, that's frontline duty. And then Laura says, I'm not in the formal classroom, but my students share with me that they feel unmotivated generally and that it seems difficult for them to start assignments. I think that's really a tough thing. And especially when students just get to Eastern, they don't know what college is, right? They don't know how a college class works necessarily. If they know it's probably not going to be the same as high school, but they don't know how. And so I think the TILT framework, transparency in teaching and learning, one of the principles of TILT is that you show students examples of what you want them to do, right? So I want you to solve this problem. Here's an example problem that's been solved. Or I want you to write an essay. Here's a sample essay. Or, I want you to, answer discussion board questions. Here's an example of a good discussion board post. So they have something to build on and they're not just stuck not knowing how to start or what to do. So that's one way. But yeah, it's students are, I think we're having a pretty serious engagement crisis, I think, in higher. I heard lots of faculty talking about the lack of student engagement in lots of ways. The FCT&L just did a needs assessment asking faculty what they wanted in professional development, what they wanted help with. And the most common answer was something about reading, right? Students don't read, but it's also classroom engagement is another big problem, how to engage students. And so that's partly why I wanted to talk about this theory, self-determination theory, which I think has lots of answers. So just to talk a little bit about why motivation matters, it's not a surprise that motivation matters. I think we'd all agree, but what the research shows us is that students who are intrinsically motivated, and I'll talk about what that means, they do a lot better at understanding the material. They have a lot more persistence, even on challenging tasks. They have a 45% greater likelihood of enrolling in advanced courses, and they're more creative and cognitively flexible in problem solving. So these are all things that we want our students to be, right? These are the traits and the practices that we want our students to have that would be great if they did have. Well, I mean, these kinds of things come from being motivated in the right way. And if you think about what it means to be intrinsically motivated, I guess I'll go to the next slide, because we're going to talk more about this. Just a little bit more about motivation, even beyond academia. And this relates to our lives as well. If you're really in an environment that supports intrinsic motivation, students develop lifelong learning orientations, greater career satisfaction, self-directed professional development, resilience. Again, all good things. So the good thing is that, come on, here we go. That psychology has spent decades, if not more than a century, studying human motivation. We now know a lot about what motivates people and the sources of motivation and the kinds of motivation. And probably the most widely tested, supported theories is called self-determination theory. And it was originally developed by these two people, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci. Now, more than 30 years ago is when they really started working on it in earnest. And since then, lots of their acolytes and other people have focused in on this. And so it's a really empirically well-supported theory. And I think it's a very powerful one. And it's been applied to just about every aspect of life, from work motivation to volunteering to hobbies. But certainly education has been a very intense focus for people working in self-determination theory at every level, from kindergarten all the way up through 12th, grade, higher ed, and even graduate school. People have done work on self-determination theory. So it has a lot to say, and there are lots of people who have figured out ways to implement self-determination theory into education. And again, it focuses on the conditions that facilitate or undermine motivation. And one of the strengths is that it distinguishes between different types of motivation and not just saying how much is someone motivated, because that doesn't really tell you what you really need to know. What you really need to know is what kind of motivation you're talking about. So they talk about motivation on this sort of continuum that goes from a motivation, being not motivated, apathy, when you're not motivated to do anything or not motivated to do this particular task, you really have almost not zero motivation, but really you're just not motivated at all. But then it goes up through what they call extrinsic motivation, where your motivation comes from something outside of yourself. And those can be external regulations, right? So rewards and punishments, that is a form of extrinsic motivation. And by the way, psychology knows a lot about that. And certainly rewards and punishments can be really effective. They can really control behavior, except that rewards and punishments, we know from research, have a lot of downsides. And one of the main downsides is that it really focuses students on just the rewards and punishments, and it gets them to ignore or forget about any of the more rewarding, internally rewarding aspects of what they're doing. That is to say, pleasure or enjoyment or curiosity. When we're motivated by those more internal things on the far right side, that's when we're doing things because of our own enjoyment. And hobbies are things that people do only for their own enjoyment, right? No one is, hopefully, we wouldn't call it a hobby if you were forced to do it, right? We would call it something else, a job or an obligation, but hobbies tend to be things that we do purely for our own enjoyment because we like doing them, and people spend hours and hours and hours of time on hobbies, and they produce incredible work doing their hobbies. There's a lot of productivity and excellence and pride. And those are all things that I think we would like our students to experience in our classroom: pride, enjoyment, curiosity, pleasure, even. And of course, this is what our education was like when we were very young children, right? In kindergarten, most of it, at least when I was in kindergarten, I don't know what it's like now, but when I was in kindergarten, it was mostly play, right? It was a organized playtime, and it was, we did things mostly for enjoyment and because we were, getting something out of it because it was just intrinsically enjoyable. But we learned a lot by doing that. The reason kindergarten is important is because you learn lots of things through that sort of, especially unstructured play. But then first grade starts, and from then on in our educational career, it seems like rewards and punishments, extrinsic motivation becomes much more dominant. We are doing things because we are compelled to do it, we're obligated to do it. And even when we get up towards this kind of identified regulation or integrated regulation, where we're starting to accept the values that the system is importing on us, like the value of hard work or the value of excellence, even where we're agreeing that those things are important and part of ourself, many times they're still extrinsically controlled. So what self-determination theory says is, if you want people to be doing things for the intrinsic value, then you should do certain things. And again, the reason that intrinsic motivation is so important is because very often it has incredible benefits in terms of productivity, excellence, pride, pleasure, all the things that we would like our students to experience in our classes, I think. So how do we move from a motivation up through extrinsic motivation towards intrinsic motivation? Self-determination theory says that there are three basic psychological needs, and these are relatedness, feeling connected to others, having a sense of belonging; competence, feeling a sense of mastery or being effective at an activity, that we're somehow good at it in some way, and also autonomy, experiencing a sense of choice, willingness, and volition, right? I'm choosing to do this on my own. And again, if we go back to hobbies, not all hobbies are like this, because some hobbies are relatively isolating, right? But many hobbies have all of these things either built into it or become part of the process. So again, I don't know if your hobby is, I don't know what your hobbies are, uh, but it's likely that your hobbies involve being with other people, right? There's a group that you belong to, a book group, or you're going to play bridge, or you're doing something in your community in some way that is having a group of people together, and you have that sense of belongingness, a bowling league when those used to exist. And then there's a feeling of competence, right? And this doesn't have to happen immediately. It may be a process, right? So you start out not being very good at it, but then you develop a sense of a mastery. You get better at things, and you're hopefully receiving feedback about your performance, and that's encouraging, and you're seeing growth and progress. But autonomy is a really important part of it as well, right? Because as soon as you start to feel like I don't have a choice in doing this, then it's leaking out of the intrinsic and going back towards the extrinsic motivation. So you've got to feel like I have a choice about doing this, and it may be that I know that I can just keep on doing this until I don't want to do it anymore, or I've just decided to do something else. I mean, I'm going to pick up pickleball and meet a bunch of people, and I'm going to try and get better at it. But if I don't want to go this week, I don't have to go. And if I want to stop playing pickleball and switch to something else, I can do that. So autonomy, feeling some sense of control and having a choice about what you do, is a really common and really essential feature of feeling intrinsic motivation. And that maybe is the one that education has the hardest time with, but we're going to figure that out. So these things are both enhanced and undermined, right? So relatedness, of course, is enhanced by having a feeling respected and feeling like you're cared for. It's enhanced by being in an inclusive environment, and feeling secure and safe in that environment. And it's undermined by competition, right? Competition serves to divide us, right? And makes us into rivals instead of collaborators or colleagues. Criticism, especially if it's harsh criticism, is going to make you feel isolated. And sometimes tradition can make people feel like, education in general is a very individual focused activity, right? I get a grade, I'm going to graduate, I'm going to take this class. And so it's a very self-focused activity in general. That's our tradition in the West of what education is like. Not the same all over the world. Other cultures have a much more inclusive, communal aspect to their education. So relatedness is more a part of their education, but for us, it's much more isolating. Let's see here. Competence certainly is enhanced by having an optimal challenge, and we can talk a little bit about what that means. Having some positive performance and getting some feedback about that. It's undermined by excessive challenges, making things too hard, not doing well, criticism. This is something that video game designers know a ton about. Video game designers are really good at giving you easier tasks at the beginning of a game, for example. And then as you get better at that, the game makes those things harder and introduces other challenges that make it harder. And they talk about having this sort of optimal challenge point where it's just outside of my abilities, but not too far, right? If it's too hard right away, you're not going to continue. But if it's just hard enough that you have to keep on trying, and eventually you get it, that is one of the things that keeps people playing video games for hours and hours, days, months, years. That it's got to be just outside of my abilities, but not too far. All right. So excessive challenges, not good at all. But at the same time, too easy challenges, not good either, right? So if you try something and it is just really, really easy, then you're going to lose interest pretty quickly. So you want it to be challenging, but not too challenging. That's a hard balance to achieve, but it's possible. And then finally, autonomy. Autonomy is definitely enhanced by having a sense of control, feeling like I am respected again, and feeling like I'm trusted to make choices. And that's a hard thing. That's been a hard thing for me as an educator, is to have that sense of trust in my students, give them a choice, and then trust them to make the right choices. But I can tell you that when I do that, students really hear that, and students will tell me that often, that they say depressing things like, no one's ever said that they trust me before, or no one's ever put me in a position where they trust that I'm going to do what is best. But they also say nice things like, thank you for trusting me. I feel like you're respecting me as a person. And so it's a really powerful thing to establish that relationship. But again, it only comes when you give students meaningful choices that are actually not just sort of surface level or inconsequential or meaningless choices. You got to give them real meaningful choices, and then trust them to make the decisions. That's a hard one. It's been a hard one for me to give up that control. And of course, it's undermined by tangible rewards, right? Rewards and punishments, threats, deadlines, imposed goals, by me controlling what they're doing, telling them that they have to do things. So these are really the three key needs that we need to try to build into our courses, so that students can develop this sense of intrinsic motivation. So I've been talking a lot, but I really want to hear from you. So let's just think about relatedness now. What do you think are examples of putting relatedness into practice? How can you enhance or support the relatedness, the connection that our students feel? Who's got an idea? Or who already does this? I'm sure some of you already do this. And if you're looking in the
I,
shared document, then you're cheating.
I can give an example
Yeah.
from when I taught the GSD course last semester. There was, I mean, there's that curriculum is pretty well laid out by first year courses, but you have some choices in the activities you do in the classes. And there was a day when we worked on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I chose some examples, some videos of students having experiences where they felt like they didn't belong. And so the examples I picked were there was a first generation student talking about how that identity impacted her experience. And there was a video, a short clip about Appalachian accents and how people were feeling the need to mask those. And then like one other one. And so like I tried to like customize those for where I thought the students in the class were coming from.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if you asked this, maybe you didn't because it was sensitive, but if you asked them, did you have a discussion about them, and did they say, oh
Mhm.
yeah, no, that's me, I felt that way?
Yeah, we talked about it. We had after each clip, we just did a little like sort of round robin discussion in the room and yeah,
And that,
people hadn't thought about those identities in terms of diversity. So that brought up some interesting conversations as well.
and that self-disclosure, which is scary some ways, can be scary, but that is a real relatedness activity, right? Disclosing things about myself and hearing those things from other students, that's going to make me feel connected to them, whether it's, oh, I have that in common with you, or I don't. Just knowing that about people. So getting to know people, right? Anything that you do in class where students get to know each other or you, right? Disclosing stuff ourselves, again, scary, and you don't want to go too far, but that is another way of enhancing the relatedness that students feel with us. So it's not just, it's not just them and us, it's them with their peers, I think makes a big difference. So self-disclosure is great. Who else? Who else has an idea?
I do in the first day or two of class, I like to do a camera roll show and tell.
Ah,
So I'll start off, I'll do it first where I pick 2 or 3 photos from my camera roll that say a bit about me.
nice.
And then I ask the students to take some time, look through the camera roll, find a few pictures that they're willing to share and talk about with their table mates. And then they go around and share those photos and tell each other why those are, important to them or what they say about them.
That's great. I love that camera roll because everyone's got a camera roll. That's a wonderful idea. I never thought about it, never heard that. That's awesome. Thank you. Who else? Tricia.
Yes, I'll mention, I feel like this comes up sometimes when I'm talking with other colleagues, but I'm not an academic. I got my job here through my real world experience as a journalist. So now I teach our journalism focused classes. And so I feel like one way for students, when you mentioned kind of relating to us, is I can take what I've done in the field when I'm lecturing on something. Today, I talked about covering breaking news and explain to them how I approach it, some anxieties I still have 20 years into my career. You go talk to somebody you don't know. Like sometimes that's the hardest part, is walking up to somebody you don't know. And so just like explain to them that I get it, I see it, and I understand. And I think having somebody who still practices journalism teaching them can sometimes be helpful.
Yeah. And the other thing you said there was vulnerability, right? And that is a hard one for teachers, I think, in general to embrace, because we want to be seen as, we're the professional in the room, we're the adult in the room, and we're supposed to be in charge and have everything, nailed down and planned, and we want to be professional. And it's hard to show vulnerability, but and I think this is probably affected by race and gender and all kinds of privilege. But I think, when you can show vulnerability, I think that helps people relate to you in general. And I think our students benefit from that as well.
Yeah.
The other thing that I am not good at, but I wish I was better at, and it's a simple thing, is just knowing everybody's name and using their names, right? That's, it's like teacher 101, right? Learn your students' names. And for me, that's a hard thing to do. My memory doesn't work well. I have to really make flashcards, and and I'm never, I'm not sure I've ever gotten through it well. Oftentimes I get through an entire semester and there's still some students I don't know their names, and that's really frustrating. Yeah, Kelly.
Just so that was my experience as well. Well, and I was vulnerable in the sense that I kind of let everybody know at the beginning of the class that I have ADHD, and one of the biggest problems for me is remembering names. Even if people I know really well, sometimes I'll mess up their names. So I was like, I am gonna try my hardest. So I just kind of put that out there in the beginning,
Yeah.
not as an excuse, but as a I've got things that hamper me from, doing what I want to be able to do. But so sharing with them.
Yeah, it's a
And they
vulnerability.
appreciated that.
Yeah. And they could probably many of them can relate to that diagnosis. So I think that's great. So just some other things that help, building a strong community, a sense of community, right? Demonstrating care, facilitating meaningful peer interactions, connecting content to student goals. These are all things that are going to help students feel like, oh, I belong in this class. This class is I belong with the people in this class, and I can connect with the instructor for this class. These are all things. So what I would like you to do is to go to that shared document. I just put the link in the chat again, and there's a spot. If you scroll down, there's a spot. There are only 5, but you can add more lines. What is one that you currently use, or one that you heard about today that you would like to use? So what do you do, or what could you do to enhance relatedness? And I'm going to try to get so I can see this document. Here we are. Yes, camera roll. That's awesome. That's a great idea. I love that idea. Customizing ancillary material. That's wonderful. To reflect them. Yeah, that's great. Emailing students when they miss class. Yes, that is awesome, right? That's really, you're seeing them as individuals, right? Making it more, oops, more lines here if you need them. Going over the syllabus, I talked more in depth about attendance, right? Okay. Small group discussions. Yeah, I think students talking to each other. It's a really powerful thing. We know from research about active learning that it's a really powerful way to help them learn in general, but it's also has relatedness benefits. So it's not just that it helps them learn, it also helps them feel connected to the other students in class. And I think that goes a long way. I actually used to have, I had at one point I had a student or two students in my class that I think they met in my class and now they're married. So that's pretty cool. So it's got some relatedness. I'm not saying that that's, one of my goals for my class, but it's a nice thing. Those are good examples of relatedness. So let's talk about competence. So what are some things that we could do to help our students develop that sense of competence? Anyone have you have an idea?
I don't know if this would apply or not in terms of, I probably, I guess, right, developing the mastery of the subject or whatever, right?
Yes, that's it.
I meet individually with my students in writing conferences, to go over their work individually. It's a big undertaking, but I do it in place of a class period or two. And I think giving them the individualized feedback helps them get better at their work. Cause I've found that if I'm like, hey, I read over your rough drafts and here are some like issues I've kind of been seeing across the board. When you're addressing the entire class, the ones who might need that note don't pay attention to that note unless we're talking one-on-one.
Yeah. So it's also connectedness, relatedness that you're working on there. But yeah, it's showing them, giving them feedback. I'm sure that you are not just constructively critical, but also encouraging, like this was good. I mean, people have lots of schemes for how to give feedback. You give them the feedback sandwich, right? I mean, there's ways to do that. And, that's part of that feedback sandwich idea is to give them a sense that they are, not just terrible, right? They're good at some things or getting better. And that's an important thing.
Well, and I found that even like if something, even like an F story or paper or whatever, I can still say, I think this is a newsworthy idea, or I can see where you want to take this. So still trying to find like that encouragement somewhere so you don't completely like unmotivate them, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And they did something, right? So good job doing something, at least you put some effort into, putting this out. That's a good first step. Now we can make it better. Now's when we can, try to make this into something that you're going to be proud of and that you're going to be excited about. So those are all great things. Yeah, individual meetings are, I wish we had time to do those, more. Other things that people do that you could do to help students feel like they can do this, that they are capable of doing it in some way.
Yeah, when they're in class discussions, I always try to find a sliver of something positive, like even if the answer is totally off base, just try to frame it in a way that's positive to encourage that. I mean, that's kind of relational as well. And then the other thing I was thinking about is semester long projects that kind of build on itself. And yeah, so in a lot of my classes that they start out and work on it in steps, as many of us probably do, and then by the end they have something that's a big substantial work that they can, reflect on, and kind of reflects a lot of the content from the semester. And I try to encourage them to be proud of
Yeah,
all the effort they put into that all semester long.
that's wonderful. It's wonderful. Yeah. So, and that's certainly, that's one of the things I was going to put here, scaffolding, right? Scaffolding is a good competence enhancing activity where they're going to do something and they feel like they've got it and then they can move on. It's a very, there's a whole psychology theory about scaffolding, and it's again about putting people in that position where they can't quite do it, but then they can, and then they can move on to do the next thing where it's a little bit too hard, but then they can. People who are trainers, sports trainers, coaches, again, they work a lot in this area trying to get people to, try to introduce new skills that are too difficult for them, but then they get better at it, then you move on. So having clear expectations is really important, right? So the students, again, know what they're being asked to do. Again, that tilt idea I talked about earlier, growth-oriented feedback, celebrating progress. I also think that small, low-stakes activities, right? So it's relatively easy things that students can, get a win on, right? It's like you give them a little bit, and if it happens often enough, you don't want to make it too easy, of course, but if they can feel like, oh yeah, I'm getting this, right? He just taught me this. We just went over this thing, and now I'm being asked to, try it out, put it into practice. Give me a chance, and I'll try it. And maybe I did it well. Maybe I figured it all out. It's easy, or maybe I'm not sure about it. But again, group activities can be like this. But even quizzes can be this way, right? So if you give people a quiz at the end of your class, every class or every other class, students are sitting there, they're listening, learning, doing all the stuff in class, and then you give them a quiz and they do well. Aha, I've got it. That's great. You're giving them feedback that they have developed, grown, mastered that particular subject, and that can be a really nice competence enhancing experience for them. So again, I would love it if we could go to that shared document, and if you scroll down more, there's places where we can put down some things that we think, oh, you're already doing it, you're ahead of me, right? Rubrics, absolutely right. Got to have rubrics that are clear and hopefully that are challenging, but still doable, right? And that's clear expectations. One of the benefits of rubrics is that it really puts it out there. This is what I'm expecting you to do, right? In this section, I want you to address these things, and I'll be looking for this stuff. So that's a clear expectations things. I used to use rubrics a lot, and I would often, encourage students, I'm going to give you the rubric ahead of time, of course. And, when you're creating your paper or whatever it is, make sure you've got something in all these little places, and this is what I'm going to be looking for. And so again, that's a good transparency activity. So competence, I think, is, hopefully our students are, experiencing, we give them feedback in lots of different ways. And the feedback we give them is going to give them information about their competence. Unfortunately, in some classes, if they're only, having 2 exams and a final, they're getting 3 opportunities, and they're really high stakes and high anxiety opportunities. And, they're maybe not as informative as they could be, because, I used to have big exams like that, and I would never let the students keep the exam because, of course, I wanted to use it the next semester, and I didn't want them to have it and give it to their friends. So the students would end up with, like either a Scantron that meant nothing, that they couldn't learn from, or they would just know their score, which isn't that informative about what they did well on, what they didn't do well on. I mean, we would go over it in class the next day and talk about it, but still it was not a very effective way of giving them feedback that was going to help them feel competent at all, unless they got an A, and then they're going to feel good about it. But if they didn't, it's not very informative, and it's not very helpful. So I try to give a lot more frequent feedback and a lot lower stakes feedback, and students can really build up their sense of competence because they can keep on doing well, and they can see their progress, and maybe they're getting better at those quizzes as they go on. So I think that's great. So yeah, lecture worksheets, fill in the answers as you lecture. I used to do that all the time. I love that practice. Include a list of priorities to address each assignment, right? So bulleted lists, right? That's good. So I like that idea. Like the most important part of this assignment is this aspect of it. This is the really important stuff. And here's some things that are not quite as important. I think that gives them an idea about what they should focus on. End of class reflections, right? KWL, I love that. Who wants to say what that KWL is? Knowledge. Is that what that is? What is
So
KWL?
like what you want to know. Wait a minute, I'm getting confused myself. What
Is-
you know, what you want to know, and what you've learned, and then you can
Ah.
also add like how you will apply that.
Nice, nice. That's awesome. So you give them a little chart with those categories and they fill those out.
At the end of each class, yeah.
Yeah. Any reflection at the end of class is fantastic. Really, really very effective. Okay, so let's go to maybe the hardest one for me, I'll say, and that's developing autonomy in our students. Because again, most of our educational system is set up so that instructors are controlling what students do, and the most straightforward and easiest to think of way of controlling students' behavior is by using reinforcements and punishments, rewards and punishments. So again, not to say it's not effective at changing people's behaviors. I have made my students read material. I've made my students write papers. I've made my students take exams, and I've made them do it pretty well because of the rewards and punishments I used to give them. But of course, the downside is that they are, again, focusing on those rewards and punishments rather than their enjoyment or their pleasure or their joy or pride in what they're doing. And maybe even to the exclusion of the content. They know how to play the game of school, but they don't, what they really know is how to get those points and how to get those grades. And that's what they're really focused on, not the content and certainly not their enjoyment. So I'm just going to skip ahead because I'm worried about running out of time. But so again, giving students meaningful choices about what they do. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. We can talk about some of those. Explaining the rationales for why you're giving them the opportunities you're giving them. Why are we going to do this activity in class? Why am I asking you to read this particular thing or do this activity? Again, that's sort of a tilt idea. Using non-controlling language. So I talk about engagements in my classes instead of assignments or opportunities. That's another way of talking about things. Now, it's really an opportunity if they have a choice about whether they do it or not. Otherwise, engagement's a little bit better. It's kind of fudging their control and their ability to not do it or do it. And acknowledging their perspective, I think, is good. It's showing that you are interested in them as a person and what they think they should be doing. Does anybody do anything, I guess, that you think is helping them feel like they have autonomy in your class? Who does something?
I
Trisha?
teach a class that's all around group work. We talk as a class about an overall theme that we want our stories to be, but then I let them choose their particular focus of the story of the mini documentary that they do.
Nice.
They're really in control of the overall story, which is what I want. I don't want to tell them you need to talk to this person. You should reach out this way. You should do this one on video, but this one on like the hope is for a 400 level class that they're able to navigate the reporting and production process themselves.
Absolutely. I love that. So the topic of their story is up to them, and really it sounds like in some ways how they go about it, and you're there to facilitate and help them, assist them.
Yeah.
That's one of the things about autonomy is it's forced me to rethink my role in the classroom from being a professor or an instructor to being a facilitator or a mentor or really an engagement designer. And then it's allowing them to engage the way they think was going to be the best, or certainly topic choice is a wonderful thing. I used to have classes where I would it gives for part of their exam, they would be able to choose which question they wanted to answer. That's a relatively easy way of giving students choice. It's not, they have to answer the question, you have to answer, some number of questions, but they have a choice, and that's an autonomy experience. So that's good. Anybody else?
Well, and I was going to say, just off of what you just said, I have a colleague who in her media law class has students work in groups while they kind of study things, and then they get to submit a question that they would like to see on the exam.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of, I think, giving them a little bit of autonomy. It might also be rewarding to them. So like I've heard students come into the hallway after the exam and say, she chose our question. They're so
Yeah,
excited about it.
Well, and what a competence experience that is too,
Right.
right? I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And that's one of the cool things about these three things: relatedness, competence, and autonomy, is that some things we do are going to hit more than one. And in fact, there are things that we can do that hit all three of them. And that's really the sweet spot, because that's really, that's very efficient use of our time and our resources. So again, what do you think you could do? What's one change you could make in your classes that you think would help your students feel like they had some control over what they did, or at least felt like, they had some autonomy, some, I don't want to say free will, because that's a broad topic, but some choice about what to do. So let's see here. Ooh, links, very nice. Yes, open pedagogy. I love it. Gotta talk about it all the time, right? Students create or co-create materials or activities, whatever. That's a wonderful thing. Very, very autonomy enhancing activities. Allow students to submit questions. That's great. Give students the opportunity to construct their assignments. What an awesome idea that is. I know that some people actually write their syllabus with their students, right? Design the class. Let's design this class together. What an incredible, I mean, that's going to be, I think, all three, right? It's going to be relatedness, because you're going to be working with the students, and the students are going to work with each other. It's competence, because they're, having to really think about this stuff, and you're going to endorse at some point, okay, let's do it that way. And then competence, I mean, or autonomy. I mean, it's going to be great. They're really having control of their entire course design. That's really going with both feet into autonomy. That's a hard one. I haven't gone that far. I've gone close to it, but not totally. I don't think I've walked in without a syllabus at all. I've come close to it though. Let's decide how they want to do some assignments, give them a template, right? I'll just put a little plug in here for the ungrading perspective. If you don't know what that is, you can find resources on the FCT website about it, and you can Google it. But ungrading is the idea. It's really an autonomy and competence and relatedness activity, without being explicitly any of those things. But it's the idea that you want to trust your students to choose even what to do, or if they're going to do it. So in some of my classes, there are no requirements, because again, a requirement is not an autonomy supporting activity, or you're being required to do it. So I say, look, there's no requirements in my class. Here are the engagements that I've created, and here are the benefits of doing them, but it's up to you to decide if you want to do them or not. Some students have a real hard time with that. They are used to the more traditional schooling approach, where we tell them what to do and then they do it. But my experience is that, it might take a few weeks or a month for students to really get into it, or maybe even, I've actually had students say it wasn't until the end of the semester that they really got it and really appreciated it, and they struggled with it for a while. But once they get it, it is really a powerful experience for them to feel like, I can control. And it's also, I've had students say that again, that it's they felt like I respected them and trusted them to do what's best for themselves. And that's a powerful experience for them as well. There are some principles about how to create SDT, so self-determination theory aligned assignments or assessments. So here are some that support autonomy, like so learning portfolios are things where students are going to choose to create what things to include in their portfolio, and they can show their growth. But their choice is a big part of that. Topic selection, like you said, Tricia, that's a really important one. Things that support competence, again, guided inquiry, right? So we're giving some guidance, but we're letting them also, follow their own path to a certain degree. So problem-based learning, those kinds of things are really giving students a lot of experiences where they're going to build on their skills. Mastery-based progression, very similar. And then relatedness, certainly any kind of group activity. So team-based learning of any kind, whether it's, 5 minutes in a class or an entire semester-long activity or anywhere in between. When students work together, they're going to have to navigate that difficulty, and it's hard. It's hard to work with other people in groups, but it's a very valuable skill. I've done a bunch of sessions about jigsaw activities. If you don't know what they are, again, you can find lots of resources online about them. They are a really effective way at getting students to learn complicated material in a group. It's a very structured kind of group activity, but it really gets students talking to each other. And there's a lot of competence built into it too, because students are in a jigsaw activity, they're teaching other students what they know. So they first master the material together in a group, and then they go and teach it to someone else, another student. And so they have this sense of competence that they may never have felt in a class before, because they are in the position of telling other students stuff that those other students don't know. And that's a real feeling of competence, as well as relatedness. So that's a really powerful activity, and I encourage you to look at that. So again, what I would love is if you could go back into that, and there's a space in that shared document that a little table here where you could, if you wanted to, you could put down what course you're talking about, which need you're talking about, whether it's relatedness, competence, or autonomy, what you do and what you'd like to change. Again, this is not, this is a totally voluntary thing, so you don't have to do this, but it's there if you do. And then I also want to point out that there are some resources at the end of that shared document, some articles, some books, and especially the website. The Center for Self-Determination Theory is an organization that is obviously focused on self-determination theory in lots of different ways. And so they've got a ton of resources on there, and especially the research section, because the research section, if you look at that part of the website, you can filter by topic, whether you can filter it by level of education, higher ed, or K-12, but you can also filter it by disciplinary topics. So people have done self-determination theory research in politics and in psychology and mathematics, and probably every discipline you can find in there. So wherever you are, whatever you're working on, someone's probably done research in that area about self-determination theory, trying to infuse their course with self-determination theory principles and showing what the results are. So I've gotten a lot of articles from that. I found lots of really good resources from that page. And I guess I just want to put it out to you that I am certainly available to talk to you or anyone else about self-determination theory. I'm not quite an evangelist for this, but it is something that I think is that's a powerful way to design your class. And when I started getting into self-determination, when I started learning about it, I started designing my course using these principles, and I didn't really talk about it with my students. I just kind of built it into the design of my courses. Now I'm in psychology, and so talking about a psychological principle like self-determination theory is an appropriate thing for me to do during it. It's a good use of my time in class. But I do put it in my syllabus. I say, look, this is why I'm designing the course this way, is because these are the principles of self-determination theory, and they probably don't read it, or if they do, they skim over it. But some of them might, really lock into it and be like, oh, that makes sense, and if they see it often enough, they might seep into their minds. And again, self-determination theory is not just about education or higher education. It's about motivation in life in general. And so, when they go on to become parents, perhaps, this can really be an important aspect of parenting. There's a whole bunch of research about that. And almost anything else they do in life, because this is a very broad theory about human motivation. So there's a lot to it, a lot more to it than we just have time to go through. So I want to be mindful of our time. We're almost out. Any thoughts or questions or ideas or feedback?
I have a logistical question about the jigsaw that might not necessarily fit in the scope of this, but I did a jigsaw activity with my GSD students and it went pretty well, except the classroom was not movable, like it wasn't tables. It was just like, and it's so that part of it made it a little bit hard. Do you ever use that when you're in a non-movable classroom?
Yeah, I did it. I did it actually in the Grice Auditorium, in that terrible auditorium in Combs. I mean, it's just like you're in a 50-year time warp back into that thing. But it has chairs that are not movable at all, and most of them you don't even want to sit in. So students had to get up and move around, and
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, get into this group, and I did a lot of counting off. Okay, I want you to count off by this. And
Yeah.
it was chaos. I mean,
It was
students
chaos. Okay.
get up and move around, and they're bringing their stuff, and it's cold, so they got a jacket and a backpack and all that shit. It's just part of it,
Yeah.
And
Okay.
actually, what I found is that students start to, first they start kind of bitching about so, and then they start chatting and they're talking about and joking around, and all of that is good.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is, in the jigsaw, and this happens in group activities all the time, one group finishes really early and the other groups are still working. And so it used to be that group that finished early, they would start talking, and at first I was like, I want to tell them to be quiet so the other students who are still working. But then eventually I was like, no, this is good. I want them to be talking to each other. This is a connection thing, a relatedness thing. So that's not wasted time. That's valuable time. And so I love that they are having those discussions. And so that sort of liminal time and space where they're moving around is not a waste of time, I don't think. I think it's actually a pretty good thing.
All right, good. I feel better now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. Well, it's 1:29, so I want to finish on time and let you go on to your next thing without delay. Thank you for being here. I appreciate this. And again, you can download that document or save it to your OneDrive, keep it, hold on to it. And this is recorded, so if you want to go back and watch it or tell someone else about it, it'll be available. All right, thanks everybody. I appreciate it. Hey, thanks for your help, Chris. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was trying to. Oh, do you have to stop the recording?
Let's see here. Let's see if I can do it. Yes. Stop recording.